Okay, so, I know there's a lot going on with the Abundance right now, between the Ambrosial Arbor and the Phantasmoon Courtyard and all of these mentions of Shuhu, but I've found myself way more focused on the thing that ate Shuhu. Part of this is just coming from an Ashvale bias. I mean, look at him. There is more to this than the pretty man with long eyelashes, though. My real focus here is the connection between the scary thing in Ashvale's arm and the void that houses a creepy train station. I've become completely hung up on a voracity elation theory that I managed to cook up because of all of this. I'm pretty sure that the path of elation only makes up about half of the story when it comes to the source of Wishpower. I think that voracity makes up the other half, like some sort of dark side to the Phantasmoon. A deeply primordial power lies hidden in plain Arcadia's shadow, and my determination to learn more about this thing took me down a rather amusing rabbit hole. I think this all comes down to Dusk Leviathans, the primeval beings of the universe that were known for feeding on cosmic dust. The Aeon of Voracity, Oroboros, is pretty much the only known Leviathan as of now, but I am pretty sure the entity in Ashvale's arm is a type of Dusk Leviathan. Possibly even a fragment of Oroboros themselves. There's this old Herta space station readable about Wubbaboos that mentions something called the Leviathan's conception theory, and this is the main reason I think Leviathans could have something to do with Wishpower. This theory basically states that the remains of Elder Dusk Leviathans seeded new life throughout the universe, as their decaying bodies became garden beds that gave birth to new life, while their dissipating life force became wandering astral spirits, such as the Wubbaboo. If I were to describe how I really think this works, I would say that while a Dusk Leviathan's body can die, their consciousness will persist forever as a type of spiritual energy that sometimes condenses into spirits. Whatever being happens to be slumbering in this void space is described as something colossal lying dormant and decay, which definitely sounds like it could be a Leviathan, or a fragment of one at least. Meanwhile, you can find these spirits known as Wispae all over plain Arcadia, and these Wispae just so happen to be the most basic unit of Wishpower. So I'm pretty sure that these Wispae are actually a Leviathan thing, which would mean that Wishpower is probably sourced from a relationship between elation and voracity. The laughter is the fuel that feeds the beast, who then provides these wandering spirits that serve as a material that can be shaped. I did already pitch this whole theory in a short, but there's so much more to this than I could ever cover in short-form content. So the purpose of this video is to fully explore this rabbit hole and go over all of the fine details. Spoiler warnings will be in the description and any needed corrections will go in a pinned comment. Now without further ado, let's unpack the secrets behind Imagenesis. The databank describes Imagenesis as the art of sculpting matter from wishes. It's a form of art that allows you to bring fiction into reality through the power of imagination and the structure of a narrative. The legendary artist Graphia is the one who has been credited as the creator of Imagenesis. Wishpower, which is a localized phenomenon unique to plain Arcadia, is what makes all of this possible. The more official explanations will tell you that Wishpower is some sort of localized anomaly or miracle brought forth by the power of elation, but of course my theory is that the basic unit of Wishpower, the Wispae, are the combined result of elation and a slumbering primordial beast connected to voracity. Life forms that are born through the art of Imagenesis are known as Imagenae. However, they have also been referred to as a type of fae or strangeling, though society considers these terms outdated compared to the term Imagenae. Still, this terminology that likens Imagenae to fae is something I'd like to place emphasis on. It could be very related to my theory, albeit in a convoluted way. It has to do with the eldritch coding of Leviathans combined with the etymology of the word eldritch. Dusk Leviathans are treated like some sort of world-devouring cosmic horror born of the void that exists outside of conventional space-time, which reminds me of the outer gods from the Cthulhu mythos. In particular, the databank description that refers to Oroboros as a black hole with thought reminds me of the outer god Azathoth, who has been referred to as a sentient black hole. Azathoth is basically the sleeping, hands-off, blind idiot god of the universe whose slumbering thoughts give way to existence itself. Basically, the universe exists as Azathoth's dream. This works really well with the conception theory because there's a lot of compatibility between Azathoth's very nature and the concept that the fading dreams of fallen Dusk Leviathans give way to creation. The connection that can be drawn between these cosmic horrors and Fae species comes from the origins of the word eldritch, which can be traced back to words that mean elf-like and otherworldly. This is why I think the Fae terminology is meant to provide a lore connection between Imagenae and eldritch horrors. I also want to take a look at Amphoreus and what Zagreus has to offer to this theory, because the mythology is a total rabbit hole in terms of connecting elation to voracity. Zagreus has been identified with this Orphic Dionysus myth in which Zagreus is considered the first incarnation of Dionysus. He was killed, dismembered, and eaten by the Titans with only his heart being left behind and found by Athena, who brought it to Zeus, after which he was resurrected as the god Dionysus, who is mostly known as a god of wine and festivity, which is thematically accurate for the path of elation, and even relevant to the symbol for elation, which does depict a glass of wine. Thematically, wine fits into all of this too, when you consider the sacramental consumption of wine representing the blood of a holy figure, such as Christ. I want you to keep this whole blood and wine thing in mind, because it is going to matter again later. As you can see though, looking into Zagreus took me on this whole journey involving eating gods or drinking blood. The Zagreus that we met on Amphoreus seemed quite the eater himself, and his mention of his bottomless tummy is super suspicious, and it's really giving voracity. Given the fact that Zagreus could bring lies into reality as long as people believed in them, I think this titan was always meant to foreshadow this whole connection between elation, voracity, and the power to bring fiction into reality. Also, you can even draw some connections to the hunt, since the etymology of Zagreus has to do with hunting animals and catching game. Which is kind of interesting, since Ashvale's shadow is a huge part of this theory, and we now know for certain that he is the leader of the Galaxy Rangers, which is a hunt faction. Ashvale is important because the cosmic horror contained in the Torn Scroll is pretty much identical to the meat grinder in the sky shown in Ashvale's ultimate animation. So it's pretty obvious that some sort of connection exists between the two. Ashvale has refused to elaborate on this connection and deems such information as classified, but at the very least, he does mention to Trailblazer that whatever slumbers here seems familiar. I've been assuming that we are dealing with some sort of Dusk Leviathan that was split into pieces, and that these are two separate fragments of the same larger being. I'm leaning towards Oroboros themselves, but it could also be an emanator of voracity. We don't really know much about the Shadow, besides that it has eaten Shuhu, Lord Ravager Zulo, and the Swarm. Pearl describes it as a gift that Ashvale found with the help of Express Navigator Icy. While trying to piece more information together through existing lore, I found just about everything that I had been looking for in the Swarm Disaster expansion for the simulated universe. The Swarm Disaster is mostly relevant to all of this because during that era, a huge conflict broke out between voracity and propagation, one that affected 2/3 of life in the universe. During this war, Oroboros opened their mouth and consumed numerous swarms along with countless worlds. Meanwhile, we know that this entity sealed in Ashvale's arm was involved in devouring the swarm, so this is one of the reasons I'd argue that this could be a piece of Oroboros. They have been missing ever since the end of the Swarm Disaster, and we still don't really know what happened to them. Maybe they ended up in pieces. This Swarm Disaster conflict between Oroboros and Tazaranth even comes up in these lecture notes on Imagenae evolution. The Structuralist Baking Society's theory, which is referred to as the Cake of God hypothesis, claims that while Aha was being hunted by other Eons during the Swarm Disaster, they baked a cake that ended up serving as the prototype for Imagenae. When they made this cake, Aha allegedly used biomatter left behind from a clash between the propagation and another Eon as the eggs. Based on the known history of the Swarm Disaster, this other Eon should be Oroboros. So this cake of God hypothesis kind of lets us associate the origin of Imagenae with the swarm disaster conflict, and I am thinking this all might be connected to the disappearance of Oroboros. When it comes to the question of what this thing in Ashvale's arm really is, it aligns almost perfectly with the depth crawlers that are mentioned several times in the Trailblaze secrets from the swarm disaster. This art that presumably depicts depth crawlers is a pretty close visual match to what we've seen of the Shadow. They also look just like the eel-type things that surround Oroboros in the only depiction we have of them. Aside from the visual similarities, there's an excerpt from Part 2 of Tragedy and Insects, The Dwindling of Stars, that really stands out to me in terms of Ashvale. A depth crawler, having razed several planets to the ground, is suddenly overwhelmed by tedious loneliness. It leans back against a mountain, which has become a wasteland, and begins to roar at the moon, as if recalling the thrill of consuming numerous breeds of the swarm. Ashvale's character design is covered with wolves and moons, so I think we can all agree that he's pretty werewolf-coded, which is why these mentions of a depth crawler roaring at the moon make for a really solid thematic connection to Ashvale. I am pretty sure that depth crawlers are some sort of subspecies of Dusk Leviathan, and maybe when Oroboros disappeared, they split off into a bunch of crawlers. One of those fragments is in Ashvale's arm, while the other one is in Plain Arcadia's torn scroll, which is why the fragment in Ashvale resonated with the torn scroll after removing the nail. When it comes to this place that we got sent after Ashvale removed the nail, I had a hard time refining my thoughts because there's more than a few paths that come into mind here. It's like a point of origin from which all things came and all things will eventually return. The void from the beginning and end of time. It's very much giving Sea of Quanta, which in Star Rail's terminology seems to be related to Device 9. Device 9 is basically reality's shadow and has something to do with the Path of Nihility, which is very curious since back on Amphoreus, the official path that Fagusa represented was supposed to be Nihility, but the prefix Fago means eating, consuming, or devouring. Plus, so many things about Hysolens as a character pointed towards voracity. Not only do you have the whale in her ultimate animation, but she was also constantly talking about feasting. I don't really have a concrete answer for this connection between nihility and voracity right now, but there's definitely something going on. Because of the eerie train station, there obviously seems to be something going on with Trailblaze and Finality when it comes to this place. Considering what happened to Trailblazer, I wonder if the beckoning call of this abyss is the reason the Astral Express crashed here. I do think there is something to be said for a connection between the Astral Express and Dusk Leviathans because of the whale decorations all over the Express. Between the Hysolens ult and the all-devouring narwhal from Genshin, I do see void-song whales as a potential subspecies of Leviathan. I did notice that this gigantic void full of teeth looks just like a sea lamprey. Sea lamprey are a type of parasitic fish that latch onto prey with their big, toothy mouths, draining their victims' blood. They are essentially a vampire fish. Which is interesting because there has been a part of me that kept thinking Ashvale sometimes seems both werewolf and vampire-coded at the same time. I think it's mainly because sleeping in the refrigerator feels kind of adjacent to sleeping in a coffin. Once I thought about it, I realized it's probably because there's a sort of blood contract thing going on here, where Ashvale himself is meant to be the wolf, while the shadow is meant to be the vampire. When he removes the pin and summons the beast, he does chant, "I offer my blood to consume this vendetta." On that note, remember the whole blood consumption thing that came up earlier during the section on Zagreus? I told you that was going to matter again later. Though this thing doesn't just hunger for blood, it longs to feed on the sweet synaptic flickers that occur when neurons communicate and transmit information. So in other words, it hungers for glucose and brain activity. This explains Ashvale being a lightning character because thoughts are electricity. There's also a specific mention of electricity when Trailblazer encounters a depth crawler in the simulated universe, so this is something that goes way back in the lore. During my research tangent involving lampreys, I found out that they've been used as a model system to study early vertebrate ancestors, with the brain and nervous system being one of the major focuses of this research. So this might be why this particular species is being used to reference a being that likes to feed on neurological activity. The reason they work rather well as a test subject for this research is because they are basically a living reflection of the primordial, which is why they also make a good allegory for a primeval species like the Leviathan. The more you know. With all of this put together, we can really get to the very root of imagenesis and how it works. Those passionate human thoughts and emotions that light up our brains. Our elation feeds the beast, who in turn provides wishpower in the form of the Wispe, which can then be shaped through the power of narratives and obsessions. Based on what Pearl said about the torn scroll eating away at both reality and the world and canvas, it doesn't seem like this relationship between elation and voracity is entirely symbiotic. It sounds like more power is being consumed than is being generated, bringing forth a form of entropy. I'm thinking that the Ambrosial Arbor and the powers of the Abundance Path might play a role in slowing down this entropy process by restoring vitality to the world. For example, with Ashvale, I think it's possible that the blood contract might work by draining life force, but at the same time, he can't die from this because he has gained some form of immortality, which is probably related to the fact that his shadow ate an emanator of abundance. I think the relationship between Ashvale, the shadow, and the consumed Shuhu is meant to reflect the relationship between Plain Arcadia, the Leviathan, and the Ambrosial Arbor. But with these multiple paths existing in a precarious balance, a tipping of the scales could lead to unprecedented disaster. I do not care if this video doesn't age well into 4.2. I absolutely had to finish this theory and get all of this out of me. The shorter patch cycle on top of some personal obligations left me feeling strapped for time though. But I was well overdue for a Star Rail video, so here I am, finally back on some Star Rail nonsense. I am fascinated by the Dusk Leviathans, and I've really been wanting more lore attached to them. As soon as I saw Ashvale's kit, my reaction was basically, oh my god, are we finally getting a character connected to voracity? And I hope that this means more Dusk Leviathan lore. So maybe I'm just being hopeful. I suppose we'll see. If you made it this far, you are greatly appreciated. Make sure to like the video and leave a comment since they will feed the algorithm overlord. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, make sure you subscribe. I've got a Patreon starting at $1 a month if you'd like to support the channel in any additional way. With all of that being said, I hope I'll see you next time.